Check, check. Give me the check. I want to leave. Give me my check. All right. All right, how's everybody doing tonight? A little cooler today than yesterday. Yay! Dropped, like 40 degrees in just a few hours. So, yeah, more my weather. Now we're getting into where I enjoy being outside a little bit. But, no, thank you guys for coming tonight. It's great to have you all here. We are in class 31, believe it or not, of this series. And if you're keeping score, there's 120 of these lessons. So we got a ways to go now. We're just a fourth of the way there. So we're in class 31. We're going to be talking about Joshua tonight, continuing that story. And we're actually going to finish the book of Joshua tonight. So if you've been, again, following along each week and you went, okay, the first week we did the first two, and then the next week we did the next couple, and now we're going to do 24. No, we're not going to do all those chapters tonight. We're going to concentrate on chapter 6 and chapter 24. And because that's kind of the highlight of it. Most of the book of Joshua is talking about them coming in and taking the land and going up against the adversaries that they had. And the thing that we have to remember there is the Israelites really didn't defeat anyone on their own. God drove the nations out before them. And that's what we're going to see a great example of tonight. And then in chapter 24, when we end this evening, we'll talk about how God did that for the people. And the people at the time went, oh yeah, this is great. But then we'll see how that changes too. So tonight we will finish up Joshua. So we're going to start, like I said, in Joshua chapter 6. And we're going to talk about the fall of Jericho. It says, now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in. Now, I'm not a military strategist, but you're going up against this armed city that is fortified, has been there for years and years, and many people have tried to attack this city and failed. And God says, okay, Joshua, here's the battle plan. What I want you to do now that you're on this side of the river is get all of your armed fighting men and walk around the city. Just take a lap. Send part of the guys out front, send 7 priests carrying ram's horns, and have them, play a little tune as they go along, and then take the Ark of the Covenant and then put another armed complement behind them and walk around the city and come on back. We'll call it a day. What? That's it. We're going to do that for 6 straight days. We're going to get up. We're going to get everybody ready. We're going to arm ourselves up for battle. We're going to get these 7 priests to grab these ram horns, grab the ark. We're going to walk around the city one time every day for 6 days. That'll show them. And I'm sure the people inside of Jericho who are boarded in there, it says they are shut in because of the Israelites. They are scared to death because they've heard all the things that Israel has done to all their opponents. And they're standing inside and all they're seeing is this army march around them. And it would be pretty intimidating because they're right there in plain sight and they're not attacking, they're not doing anything, they just walk around the city and then they go back to their camp and then they come back the next day and they walk around the city and they go back to their camp and next day they walk around the city and go back to their camp and they're probably thinking, is this some kind of a mental strategy? Are they trying to get inside of our head? Is this like, icing the kicker with that last minute time out before they get a kick, or what are they doing, But God said, you need to trust me because I'm the one who's doing this, so I'm going to set the rules. And if you're going to do this, and I'm going to do this, you need to do what I ask you to do. So for 6 days they did that. So Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it. And he ordered the army, advance, march around the city, with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord. When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding, but Joshua had commanded the army, do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices. So not only are you going to walk around the city, you're going to do it quietly. Just walk around the city. Do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout, then shout. So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the army returned to camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. You thought they were going to do this for every one of the days, didn't you? Say that little thing, but they didn't. For 6 days, they did the same thing. March around the city, go back to the camp. 7 guys blow the trumpets, march around the city, go back to camp. On the 7th day, they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her or in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. So we're going to pause there for just a second. He says, we're going to go up there. We're going to march around it 7 times. On the 7th time, they're going to do a loud blast on the trumpets. I'm going to give you the signal. You guys all shout and scream, and the walls are going to come down. We're going to take this city. However, here's the catch. Everything in that city is devoted to God. This is his city. So this is our first battle in the promised land. This is our first battle as we come in here. This is going to set the tone for everything. But the city is the Lord's. The only thing you are to spare are Rahab and her family because of what she did for the spies. Everything else is dedicated to the Lord. And so he's going to give them a list here in just a second. But it's the gold, it's the silver, it's the bronze, it's the iron. It's all those things. Those are to go to the Lord, not to the men. They are not to go in and plunder this city. They are not to go in and take any of the other goods that are in this city. None of the linens, none of the textiles, none of that kind of stuff. It is the Lord's city. You guys go in, kill everything that you encounter. And we're going to see that too. And some people go, whoa, wait a minute, that seems a little bit harsh. But God said, this is basically the punishment on Jericho. So other than Rahab and her family, everything they encounter in that city, they will put to death. Men, women, children, animals, everything. Nothing will be alive in there. And then everything is given to the Lord. So it says, all the silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. You must give the Lord all these things. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed, so that everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. Now again, I've never heard of this as a military strategy until this point, but it's exactly what God wanted them to do. Do not go attack the city. Do not bring up your forces and draw up battle lines and try to stand against this city. You can't do it. Be obedient to me and tell me right now that you're going to give me these gifts. These things are devoted to God. And they're like, yep, okay, deal. And God says, okay, shout. Do what? When you hear the trumpet blast, you all give the war cry, you all shout. And when they did, the walls collapsed on Jericho. Now, I will say something here that I just, again, I try to give a realistic picture, okay? Not trying to discredit anything. But you may have read or may have heard, oh, I've been to Jericho and I've seen the walls and the walls have fallen outward. And you can go there, and I've read people who have said this. I've been there and the walls had you can see how they've fallen outward. They weren't pushed in. It's obviously because of what happened there with Joshua and the Battle of Jericho. I myself have been to Jericho a couple times. And I have been to the walls. And there is nothing that indicates that the walls have fallen out. Here's why. Mud brick walls. Mud brick walls from around 1450 AD or 1400 AD are not still laying on the ground. Go make a nice dirt clod. You can put grass in it, whatever you want, bake it in the sun, get it nice and hard, and then sit it on the picnic table. After a few good rains, come back and see how good it looks. So it's difficult when people say, oh, we can prove this archaeologically. And then people go, because the walls have fallen out. And then the secular archaeologists and scientists go, are you crazy? The bricks aren't there. Not only was it destroyed and it was mud brick, but it had been rebuilt since then. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So the remains of what was there probably would not be there. I can tell you this, though. The city was destroyed, and archaeological evidence as far as the layers, when you dig down into the strata of the earth and you see the way things are, the destruction level that was burnt at Jericho matches the timeline of when Joshua went into the land. That's a pretty good indicator. Even by secular standards, these things lined up. Now, some people will say, nope, it's off by a few hundred years, but they kind of change their mind depending on when you say the Exodus was, because they're going to make sure they don't land on that same date. But there is that destruction. The city was destroyed. But as far as saying, oh, the walls are still laying there out, where they fell outward rather than inward, they weren't attacked, they fell naturally, blah, blah, that's just not really the case, because that's not the way archaeology works. The other thing that is really remarkable, though, is by the time Joshua got there, Jericho was a very old city at that point. Jericho is one of the oldest cities, if not the oldest city in the world, where they have remnants they've dug down to. And when I was there are remnants of towers that predate Joshua by hundreds of years, if not 1,000 years, something like that. It's crazy how old some of these structures are. And the time of Joshua, they had rebuilt a lot of it. So by the time he got there, it was actually heavily fortified, even beyond what it initially was. And they built ramparts. And ramparts are basically big dirt embankments. So say the initial city walls were 10 feet high. Then what they would do is to refortify that is they would build ramparts off the earth so far out, and they would make a sloped hill up to that height of 10 foot and then build more wall on top of that, essentially. And so they would keep making the walls taller, and they would build up these ramparts, because what the ramparts did is they would, number one, stop you from running straight up to the wall, because you're running uphill. And if you run like I do, you don't want uphill. And so they make you run uphill. And the other thing is you can't bring any kind of siege things against it very easily. If the ground's flat going up to a wall, you can bring all sorts of stuff up against it, battering rams and whatever. But if you have to climb up a pretty steep incline, that's pretty hard to bring anything up against it. So they had done this in the past. The crazy thing about Jericho is if you go there, you can still see a lot of those different layers. And so there is layers of destruction. You can see some of that. There is even still some of the original mud brick, because it's been buried underneath the ramparts. And it hasn't been exposed to anything. So when they excavate down to it, oh, here's some of those original walls. And some of those walls date back to even before the time of Joshua. So it's not like there's not an archaeological record there. It's just you're not going to go there and find Rahab's scarlet thread still hanging from the window, is what I'm trying to tell you. And sometimes they make it sound like that, and that's what gives archaeology kind of a black eye when we talk about biblical archaeology, is people will tell you some really crazy stories, and we need to be realistic about what there actually is. But I'm telling you that what there actually is supports the biblical account. But we can't claim more than there is, because that makes it look ridiculous, and then people don't believe it. So we have to be careful how we push that line, I guess you'd say. So anyway, the walls came down. Not by their strength, not by their might, not by anything else. It wasn't an earthquake that hit at that exact moment. They shouted, the walls fell down. The army of Israel ran straight in. And it says, they devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. Joshua said to the 2 men who had spied out the land, go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her. So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out their entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. They're not Israelites, but they're with them. So just outside the Israelite camp, we'll give them a place to camp as well. You are now protected. You're part of our group. Then it says, then they burned the whole city and everything in it. And again, that's where you get some of these archaeological levels. You get large levels of burn or charcoal and things like that. And when they dig that back up, by how far down it is in the soil determines how long ago it was, how many cities have been there, whatever else. And they can date those levels by pottery and by other things that they find. If they're lucky enough to get coins, whatever, they can date those layers, and they find these charred layers, and then they date them according to the stuff that's with it. It says, but they put the silver and the gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. At that time, Joshua pronounced this solemn oath. Okay, so this is an important oath. Joshua's standing there. First day, basically, that they've attacked anybody in the promised land. First day of battle. And Joshua declares this. He says, cursed before the Lord is the one who undertakes to rebuild this city, Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn, he will lay its foundations. At the cost of his youngest, he will set up its gates. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. Jericho was dedicated to God. All the articles of gold, silver, bronze, iron, all that stuff were given to the Lord. It was a sacrificial city to God for the conquest of the land that was coming. It also struck terror in everybody else in Canaan. Jericho is one of the border cities. It's big, it's bad. They got an army, they got fortified walls, they got ramparts up against them. That place is solid. And when the neighboring city a few miles up the road sees Jericho as a big puff of smoke and nobody alive to tell the tale, they get pretty nervous. Because our city's not quite as big as Jericho. The walls aren't quite as high. Gates aren't quite as thick. And if they did that to Jericho in 7 days, what are they going to do to us? The Assyrians, when they came down many years later, when they conquered Israel, used to use that same tactic. They would actually go in and they would ask a city to surrender, and if the city would not surrender, they would go in and they would kill everybody, cut off their heads, stack them up outside the gate, and burn the city. Then they would walk to the next city and say, tomorrow you can either surrender or that's you. And we're going to cut off all your heads and stack them up outside the city and burn your city, and we'll move to the next one. And it didn't take too many cities before people went, maybe we should think about a surrender. And that's the way they would conquer lands. When Israel fell to Assyria, there's destruction where they came in and destroyed these cities and, went from one to the other. When the Assyrians got to the Philistines, there's no destruction. There are also no more Philistines. They all, we're Assyrians! And they learned a new language. And instead of a destruction level, what they have is a level that like changes all of their artwork and their gods and their poetry and whatever else. They're just like, yep, we're now Assyrians. We're good with this. We saw what you did to the Israelites. We're good. And that's what God is doing with Joshua and with the army of Israel. God is driving out the cities before them and the peoples before them. And one of the ways that God is doing it is by striking this fear in their heart. You see, you cannot stand against us. And by striking fear in their heart, they either fled or were destroyed. And so God used that to his advantage. But Joshua pronounces this curse on the city and says anybody who tries to build it is going to be at the cost of his firstborn and his lastborn sons. And you go, wow, that's kind of a specific, interesting little curse. Israel goes into the land. After the time of King Solomon, they divide into two kingdoms. You have the northern tribes of Israel and the southern tribes of Judah. And the northern tribes of Israel go through a few kings, and they get to a king named Ahab. Ahab was a very wicked king. His queen wife was named Jezebel. You may have heard of her. And Ahab was very wicked and didn't listen to God, didn't listen to the things. He worshipped foreign gods in Israel and set up altars to foreign gods and this kind of stuff. And so in 1 Kings chapter 16:34, we have this little clip, one verse, little story. And this is what it says. In Ahab's time, Hiel of Bethel rebuilt Jericho. He laid its foundations at the cost of his firstborn son, Abiram, and he set its gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub, in accordance with the word of the Lord spoken by Joshua, son of Nun. There's a curse, as it says, but it really wasn't a curse. It was prophecy that God gave to Joshua. So if anybody tries to set this city up, it's going to cost them their sons. And that's what happened. Hiel decided he was going to go rebuild Jericho as a strong, fortified city. There's a natural water source. There's a clean spring. And it's pretty well fortified on the one side with mountains. On the other side, you got the long kind of open plain going down to the Jordan River. And man, it strategically is in a really wonderful spot. It sits right at the end of the Wadi Kilt, which leads up to Jerusalem. Strategically, it's really great. And he says, you know, Ahab, we need to rebuild this. And they went, yeah, that's a great idea. Yep, great idea. Later, the city was rebuilt, even after this. Herod built it as one of his palace cities because of its strategic place, because of its water source, because of all that. And today there is actually a Palestinian village at the site of, or actually it's around the ancient site, but at the site of Jericho. So people are still living there to this day. Again, oldest city in the world is what they claim. Oldest inhabited city of the world, and they still live there today. But the old fortified city is kind of in the middle of town, and it's an archaeological site that you can go into. All right, so that's Joshua 6. Joshua 24, it says, then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. Now, what you have missed since chapter 6 is the taking of most of the rest of the land. Not all of it, most of it. They got the major territories taken care of, but they didn't conquer a few key cities in each of the areas. So they didn't kick out all the Canaanites. They didn't kick out all the Jebusites. They didn't kick out everything, but they were getting kind of tired of war. So God says, okay, take a little break. And then go back and finish what you have started. Go back and kick out the rest of the Jebusites. Go out and kick out the rest of the Canaanites. Go out and kick the people out down on the coastal land, the area, tribal allotment to Dan. Go do all those things. And so they get a rest from their fighting and from their labor. And long story short, they never went back and cleaned out the land. David finally took Jerusalem from the Jebusites when he was king. The area that became known as the area of the Philistines was the coastal land that Dan should have occupied. And they should have kicked those people out, including the ancestors of Goliath. They should have been long gone. before Goliath was even born. The descendants of Anak, they're called, these giant people that lived in the land that they were worried about when they first sent the spies in when they were in the wilderness, those descendants, they never quite attacked. They left some of those places alone because it seemed like it would be a little bit hard. They'd already seen God conquer cities before them time and time again, and they just got tired of war and they didn't want to do it anymore. And so all these things that we see coming back haunting them as they became the nation of Israel and settled there until the time that they finally were conquered, all those little things kept coming back and haunting them, like the Philistines. All these battles they had with them should not have ever taken place because the Philistines should have never been there. But their unfaithfulness led to all those consequences. Kind of like with us. But anyway, so Joshua assembled all the tribes, all 12 tribes, come and meet at Shechem, which is the city that he has set up as kind of the capital up there. And it says he summoned the elders, leaders, judges, and officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. Joshua said to all the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods." So that's Abraham's background. Other gods. What you're going to get here is a great little history of Israel. "But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him throughout Canaan and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau, but Jacob and his family went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there, and I brought you out. When I brought your people out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea. But they cried to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians. Then you lived in the wilderness for a long time. I brought you to the land of the Amorites who lived east of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I gave them into your hands. I destroyed them from before you, and you took possession of the land. When Balak, son of Zippor, and king of Moab, prepared to fight against Israel, he sent for Balaam, the son of Beor, to put a curse on you, but I would not listen to Balaam, so he blessed you again and again, and I delivered you out of his hand. Then you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, but I gave them into your hands. I sent a hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you. Also the 2 Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow, so I gave a land on which you did not toil and cities you did not build. And you live in them and eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. Now, fear the Lord and serve him with all your faithfulness." So Joshua is telling the people of Israel, you're here because God brought you here. Everything in your past says you should not even be here right now. But look at miracle after miracle after miracle that God did. Look at the way he spared you and saved you and brought you up against all odds. And you're here now because of him, so serve him faithfully. Look at everything he's done for you. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshipped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. Whether the gods of your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. Because again, that's the other thing that we find out, that when the Israelites were conquering the land, they would find some of the gods of these other people and go, oh, look, this God's supposed to bring good crops. It's a fertility God. Maybe we should keep it around in case. Oh, this is a God of, whatever, cows, and we want to have some good cows, so maybe I'll keep it too. And so they were even picking up the detestable practices of the people that they were conquering, and God was conquering them because of their detestable practices. An Israelite was conquering them because they worship these gods, and then they go there and go, well, that's kind of a cool God. Why do you think they just got destroyed? It says, but as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Probably the most well-known verse out of Joshua. Choose you this day whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. Then the people answered, far be it from us to forsake the Lord to serve other gods. Really? But you got some with you right now. You need to get rid of them. It was the Lord our God himself who brought us and our parents up out of Egypt, from that land of slavery, and performed those great signs before our eyes. He protected us on our entire journey and among all the nations throughout which we traveled. And the Lord drove out before us all the nations, including the Amorites, who lived in the land. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God. Period. We are going to serve him. Look at all the things he's done for us. We are going to serve him. Then Joshua said to the people, you are not able to serve the Lord. You guys are kind of losers. And this is really bad because I don't think you're able to. I think you want to. I think with your lips you're saying we're going to do this, but with your actions you're weak when it comes to your dedication to him. It says he is a holy God. He is a jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve foreign gods, he will turn and bring disaster on you and make an end of you after he has been good to you. They said, do not kid yourself. The Lord your God is an awesome God who has given you this entire land and given you these cities you didn't build and land you didn't toil over and vineyards you didn't plant and olive trees you didn't plant. And he has blessed you beyond your imagination. But don't kid yourself. He's still a righteous and just God. And if you turn from him and you start sinning against him, he's not afraid to give his wrath. And that's what's coming if you're not faithful. The other side of this, of course, is remain faithful and you will never have to worry. People always talk about the secret to happiness. I want to find the secret to life, the secret to happiness, the secret to success. Here it is. Follow the Lord and he'll give you everything your heart's desire. Nah, I think I'll do it my way. I'm going to go find my way to happiness rather than what God has already given us and told us this is the way to happiness. This is the way to everything you want and everything you desire. Nah, I think I kind of want to do it my way. I think we've all been there at one point or another, some way in our life. And it says, but the people said to Joshua, no, we will serve the Lord. Then Joshua said, you are witnesses against yourselves that you have chosen to serve the Lord. Yes, we are witnesses, they replied. He says, you are giving testimony right here that you are going to serve the Lord. Yes, you're testifying against yourself. Yes, we are, because we're going to serve him. Now then, said Joshua, throw away the foreign gods that are among you. You wouldn't think he'd have to make that statement after what they just said. But he's going, you're telling me you're going to serve God? Yep. You're good with this? Yep. He's a jealous God? Yep. He will bring wrath if you mess around with him? Yep. Then why are you still holding on to the foreign gods? That should have been the first thing that, whoa, got to get rid of that. But instead they went, but I like this one. It matches the drapes. I got to keep this one. So it says, throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God and obey him. On that day, Joshua made a covenant for the people. And there at Shechem, he reaffirmed for them decrees and laws. And Joshua recorded these things in the book of the law of God. Then he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak near the holy place of the Lord. See, he said to all the people, this stone will be a witness against us. It has heard all the words the Lord has said to us. It will be a witness against you if you are untrue to your God. This stone right here, it heard everything he said. So if there's a question, God can just ask the stone, which God could do. But he's like, this is a witness that you've done this. Then Joshua dismissed the people, each to their own inheritance. After these things, Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. And Joseph's bones, which the Israelites had brought up out of Egypt, were buried at Shechem in the tract of land that Jacob bought for 100 pieces of silver from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. This became the inheritance of Joseph's descendants. And Eleazar, son of Aaron, died and was buried at Gibeah, which had been allotted to his son Phinehas at the hill country of Ephraim. Now, in that last part, the thing that I want you to listen to, because it's going to come back. Next week, we're going to start the book of Judges. And we're going to start talking about the judges. And Joshua really writes the first line that seems to be kind of the underlying story of the entire book of Judges. And that was, Joshua died. And all the people of Israel followed the ways of the Lord during his lifetime and the elders that were with him and saw the things that God had done. It doesn't say they kept following the way of the Lord. It says they kept following the way of the Lord as long as those people right there remembered. And when the people who were the elders and the chiefs of Joshua, when they died, the next generation just let it slide. They saw no value. And that starts to spiral into what we know as the time of the Judges. For those of you who have never read the book of Judges or studied the book of Judges, it is probably the darkest time in Israel's history, all the way up until the destruction of Jerusalem. It is really bad how far Israel slides after Joshua dies. So the judges were not people who sat at a bench, the big gavel. The judges were people that God used when Israel got to its lowest points and corruption came upon them. They would go into a cycle of worshiping other gods or sin or whatever, and then God would send an oppressor, another nation, to come in and oppress Israel, put them essentially into slavery, tax them, take away their things, take away their crops, their houses, whatever. And when they would get to a certain point, which was pretty much as at the lowest, they would cry out to God. They didn't remember him when they were doing good. But when they hit bottom, they would cry out to God, and God would raise up a judge. And the judge was one that would come in and pronounce the sin of the people to them, and if they repented of their sin, God then delivered them. And we see this over and over and over again. And each judge brings them back to a point of repentance and a point of revival to where they're worshiping God, and then you'll get a little phrase that says something like, and this judge died. And the people did what they thought was right in their own eyes. They stopped listening to God. They stopped following his law. They stopped looking at his word. They stopped worshiping just him. And then they would hit bottom again. An oppressor would come in, start to really crank down on them, and they would cry out to the Lord, and God would say, here comes another judge. And he would send somebody in who would spark a revival and get the people to realize who God was, and then God would raise them back up. They would get their independence, they'd be worshiping God, and then that judge would die. And then he'd raise up another judge. We're going to see that for 400 years. So, in your life, if you have been walking along and slipped into an area of sin and hit rock bottom and cried out to the Lord and said, Lord, save me and forgive me, and the Lord has brought you back up, don't be like the nation of Israel. Stay up. Because God can bring another judge, and he can bring another fall. Yeah, it is. A whole book of Judges is self-will run riot. And the people do. I mean, yeah, it's actually, I don't know how in depth we're going to go with some of this, but during the part of the Judges, there were priests of the tribe of Levi that were selling blessings of God basically to the highest bidder. There was so much wickedness going on, the tribes started to fight amongst themselves, and if it wasn't for God's intervention, the entire tribe of Benjamin would have been massacred by a couple of the other tribes. And they were only spared by a few people. They were killing each other. They were taking advantage of each other. They had totally disregarded the law of God. They'd made it a mockery. And so that's where we pick up next week. Let's see how good Israel does. Questions? How old was Joshua? He was a young man when they left Egypt, and he died at 110. So he would have been probably in his 80s or so when they started conquering the land, 90, something like that. Not a spring chicken. But yeah, so he might not have been quite that old. He would have been, like I said, of fighting age, he would have been numbered because he and Caleb were the only two that were of accountable fighting age that entered the promised land because they were the two spies that came back with a good report. So he would have been probably closer to 20 or so when they left there. 60s, yeah, he'd have been probably 60, 70 when he took over, 110 when he died. Somewhere in that neighborhood. Like a Bible timeline? No, actually, the Bible timelines are really good. You have to be a little bit careful because they'll differ from each other. The ones that I tend to go with, the ones that I see being more accurate, look at the date of the Exodus first off. And if the date of the Exodus is around 1100, between 11 and 1200, then it's probably not real biblically accurate. Look for the date of the Exodus to be somewhere around 1450 BC. Exodus at 1200, to get the judges put in there real nicely. And so if they move the Exodus back, it means that they've taken more of a liberal approach to the scriptures. Yep, around 1450 BC. Kind of look at that. That's just kind of a quick reference point, and then everything else kind of spreads out from there. That gives you time to have the judges, and that has Solomon building the temple around 960 BC. And so if he's building the temple around 960, they're leaving Egypt around 1450. Yep, absolutely. And it'll tell you where the prophets fall into that, where the kings fall into that. It is very, very useful tool. Yeah. Yes, Merlin.
It sounds like civilizations tend to repeat the time of judgment. Just after the Civil War, Lincoln was judges.
Mm-hmm. I think all civilizations do have that kind of a judges type cyclical. Societies tend to do that, like you said. People tend to do that. We tend to cycle through different times of our life where we have, when we talk about it individually, we don't refer to it as like a cycle like the judges do as a nation. We refer to it as peaks and valleys, mountaintop experiences and valleys. Oh, I'm up here close to the Lord, and boom, I'm down here at the bottom. And so we kind of refer to it that way. But it's that same pattern that we get with Israel. A judge brings them up, and then the society brings down. And then they come back up, and then they go back down. And so, yeah, it's definitely, you see it through all societies. You can kind of track that pattern of blessing and curse over and over again. Get with God. Yeah. Well, eventually it will, because there's going to be a king who comes and sets up his kingdom, and those cycles are going to end. And that seems to be sooner than later, if you look out the windows. But yeah, and so that does come around. The crazy thing about the book of Judges is when we get done with Judges, and we'll go into, biblically we'll go into Ruth and stuff like that, but we'll go into the time of kings then after the Judges. And kings, because the people of Israel cried out, we want a king. We don't want to be like this anymore. See, God was supposed to be their king. They're supposed to be looking to him. And in this theocracy, God would have led the nation of Israel, and they would have answered to him. And instead, the people, when they get back, things kind of rolling together, they said, well, the problem is we don't have a king like everybody else. We want a king like the nations around us. And so God says, that's not what you want. Oh, yeah, we want a king. And Samuel says, no, here's what's going to happen if you get a king. And he lays it out for him, and the kings of Israel hit every one of those boxes that Samuel sets up. He said, these are all the things the king's going to do. This is all the wicked ways they're going to act, and they do. And so, again, we see God's hand in prophecy with that. Before they get a king, before Saul even takes the throne, God says, this is the way this ends. Oh, no, it won't. We got this. We'll be good. And then, here comes that long slide. But anytime, and we have to be careful of this, really, and this is my little soapbox, and then we'll close here. But men have to remember that we have to rely on God. When we think we have the answers, we're coming off that crest and starting to fall down. When we think we have all the right direction and answers, we are pulling away from God. We need to continually be looking to him. And, if maybe imagery, I'm kind of making this up as I go along, but imagery-wise, if we keep our eyes up, we'll keep climbing the hill. But as soon as we take our eyes off God and we look down, we've started the descent. And so we need to keep our eyes looking up, and we keep climbing that hill, getting closer to God. And in our individual lives, we need to do that. In our corporate lives, we need to do that. As a church, we need to do that. As a nation, we need to do that. Keep our eyes fixed on him, and if we do, we keep climbing. But as soon as we take our eyes off him and we think we have all the answers and we think we've got all the stuff, then we focus down and we start leveling off and going down that slope. And the only way to stop that is to get our eyes back up on him. So, any other questions? Or then, you got your elbow ready there, Mel? Would anybody like to close in prayer? Oh, Clem would. Look at that. thank you guys for coming again. See you Sunday, and then some of you Monday, and then we'll be back together next Wednesday. And then Sunday, and then Monday, and then Wednesday.